Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. New York just elected a Democratic Socialist, which is how communists pronounce communist. Los Angeles is not far behind as America's biggest cities double down on self-destruction, dusting off every dumb idea Marxists have cycled through going on generations now. Last week, the city of Los Angeles passed a $30 minimum wage for hotel and airport workers. With mandated benefits, it actually comes to $38 an hour, as in if the person's not worth $38 an hour, the job is illegal. An Oxford economics poll estimates 15,000 hospitality and construction jobs will be eliminated in the near term, costing over $500 million. LA's hospitality industry employs about 1 in 10 Angelenos, so that's 500,000 blue collars. It's already hemorrhaging jobs since LA turned into an open-air dump, so 11,000 hotel jobs lost in the past year alone. Still, 11,000 does not hold a candle to what is coming for New York City. On Tuesday, New York held its primary to choose its next mayor. This was just the Democrat primary, but given New York is a one-party city, it is effectively the election. The winner was one Zohran Mamdani, a proud Democrat socialist, socialism, but with colors. Mamdani defeated establishment fixture Andrew Cuomo, a former New York governor famous for killing thousands of elderly during COVID and sexually assaulting his staff, not necessarily in that order. Mamdani's platform would make a Berkeley sociology professor blush. He's promising free universal childcare, free buses, although nobody pays anyway since they defunded the police, a citywide rent freeze, and city-run grocery stores mimicking the wildly successful Soviet Union. Mamdani wants to outlaw every low-wage worker with a universal $30 minimum wage, while cracking down on so-called gig work like Uber or Amazon that helps 1.8 million New Yorkers pay the bills. The police budget would be replaced by a Department of Community Safety. Schools would get hundreds of millions to, quote, combat climate change. $65 million will go for gender-affirming care and a new Office of LGBTQIA+, to distribute city money to left-wing NGOs who would then launch more lawsuits to get more money. How to pay for all this? By raising the top income tax to nearly 17%. That's 11 state and 6 city. Of course, this will chase New York's surviving rich people to Miami and Dallas, where they pay zero tax, which will further defund the police. Mamdani also wants a new 11.5% corporate tax, which will chase New York's surviving corporations to Miami or Dallas or perhaps China. Sadly, we know how this ends because it's happened in dozens of American cities from Baltimore to Detroit to St. Louis. A doom loop of collapsing tax revenue, left-wing NGOs and teachers' union growing like a cancer to gobble up what's left, all while the middle class flees in droves driven out by collapsing city services and rabid taxes. The doom loop ends in a ghost town of burned-out buildings where families once played in the streets. So as sex, since Trump's election, Democrats have been trying to convince Americans they are not crazy. The New York election was a high-profile litmus test, a battle between the party establishment and the radicals who would destroy the country. The lunatics won. Last week, a, quote, very dumb Jerome Powell testified to Congress, yes, mean tweets are back. This was routine testimony as opposed to the improvised Sunday night press conferences every time the Fed breaks the banking system. Still, the very dumb performance was widely watched for clues if Powell will continue strangling the economy with high rates to kneecap Trump's agenda. The background is inflation. The consumer price index is currently running annualized 1%. Which, going by 112 years of Fed precedent, is too low. I mean, it's not too low for the American people, who like buying groceries without getting a second mortgage, but normally the Fed would be panic cutting for fear of deflation, falling prices. Of course, deflation isn't a bad thing. It means your economy's growing, you have more stuff for money to chase. Still, the Fed, being an inflation factory, has pretended for 112 years that deflation is the great Satan, the great excuse to push rates too low. But not this time. Powell is keeping rates at some of the highest levels in 30 years despite 1% inflation. His excuse is tariffs, which even the Fed has estimated would be small, maybe 2 or 3 points one-time inflation. In fact, 3 months into the Great Tariff War, there has been zero tariff inflation. The reason being that foreigners are eating the tariffs. Recently, Zero had shared a chart of Japanese car import prices showing they fell in near lockstep with tariffs, as in companies are lowering their price to keep market share, which cancels the tariff inflation. This shouldn't be a surprise. Last tariff war in Trump's first term, that's exactly what Chinese did as well. Companies ate the tariffs, and then Beijing reimbursed them, meaning not only did we get no tariff inflation, Beijing paid our bills, which is pretty cool. Still, Powell is clinging because it's his best shot at kneecapping Trump's tariffs. In other words, get rid of the tariffs or the economy gets it. This matters, of course, for Jerome Powell's future speaking fees. So what's next? As you'd expect, the knives are coming out for Jerome. Two Fed members, Waller and Bowman, have already gone rogue, demanding immediate cuts. The head of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which backs 70% of mortgages, said Powell needs to, quote, lower rates or resign. Donald Trump has mused that maybe he should just appoint himself Fed chair, which is worth a video on its own. Still, barring some big balls legal maneuvering by Trump, he is stuck with Powell till his term ends next May, meaning the country is stuck with strangling rates till at least May. Markets are currently projecting just 1 point of cuts in the next year, in other words, all the way through Powell's term. Given current inflation, that would mean rates would be historically high well into the midterm elections. It would also mean little relief for the rapidly deflating housing market, for consumer debt and credit cards, and for business borrowing that would otherwise create jobs. On the bright side, prediction market Kalshi is projecting 9% odds Trump will, quote, end the Federal Reserve System by the end of his term, so maybe a Fed the president hates is not such a bad thing. A word from our sponsor. If you own gold or silver, you know they're a great hedge against financial instability and let you grow your wealth outside the banking system and gain greater control over your finances. Monetary Metals offers you the ability to increase your precious metal ounces every single month. Instead of paying to own metal, with Monetary Metals, you get paid 4% on your gold paid in more ounces. Now's the time to secure your wealth and build your legacy in an asset that the government cannot inflate away. Join thousands of investors earning interest in physical gold and silver every month with Monetary Metals. Visit monetarymetals.com/Peter to learn more. Now back to our show. The big beautiful bill passed the Senate, and yes, they made it worse. Last Saturday night, while American voters were distracted by the real world, the Senate passed the big beautiful bill. Now, their version is different than the House, meaning it ping-pongs until both House and Senate pass an identical bill to Trump. Still, it is one step closer to reality. Now, when Big Beautiful first passed the House last month, I was not a big fan because the bill was solid on taxes, but made pretty much the bare minimum of spending cuts. So the current version makes Trump's 2017 tax cuts permanent, which are huge for small business, big business, and the standard deduction. It also partially exempts tips, overtime, and Social Security double taxation through 2028, all campaign promises of Trump. On the other hand, I was hoping for more given Trump's campaign talk about fundamentally changing the income tax, exempting millions, even replacing the entire income tax with tariffs. Still, Big Beautiful is solid on taxes. It was a very different story with spending, where Congress left a lot on the table despite unified Republican control of Congress and the White House, something that's happened just 8 times since 1931. What they did cut was mostly tightening Medicaid and food stamp eligibility so the able-bodied and illegals are not getting handouts, throw in tweaks to student loans, phasing out wind, solar, and renewable subsidies, and federal workforce reductions, and you get maybe $200 a year. Of course, the bill then turns around and adds about $50 billion a year in fresh spending, most of which is border and deportation, which are excellent returns on investment. But even the military got a fresh $15 billion a year, despite spending almost $8 trillion per year. Put it together, and they're cutting maybe $150 billion a year on a $7 trillion budget, which is 2%. So A- on taxes, C- at best on spending. Plus, of course, a $4 trillion hike in the debt ceiling, which is a solid F. So that was a House bill. As expected, the Senate made it worse, partly because the arcane Senate parliamentarian vetoed a bunch of cuts as, quote, extraneous to a tax and spend bill. Being Democrat appointed, she vetoed cuts to tax-funded gender changes, food stamps for migrants, Elizabeth Warren's CFPB, and EPA emission mandates. She also vetoed efforts to streamline the environmental straitjacket on oil and gas drilling. Now, Republicans could just override her, but they chose not to. Happily, she kept the new tax on cash remittances by foreigners and illegals. Unhappily, the Senate slashed it to just 1%, which is barely worth having. So beyond the rogue parliamentarian, the Senate also extended some of Biden's green tax credits, delayed food stamp cuts, removed language limiting benefits to illegals, and bumped the so-called SALT deduction so rich New Yorkers can write off their state taxes. Together, these come to maybe $200 billion total, about 20 a year. Still, $200 billion here, $200 there. Soon you're talking real money. So as next, Republicans had the perfect storm to slash federal spending: unified control, president who wants to end the income tax, and Elon Musk. And all we got was 2%. Republicans are promising more cuts in discretionary spending later this year. That's everything from U.S. aid and the Department of Education to military and the EPA. So it's theoretically possible they could yet redeem themselves, but don't hold your breath. Last weekend, Canadians woke up to the terrifying prospect that their new Prime Minister might be dumber than Justin Trudeau. Canada's freshly installed Prime Minister Mark Carney managed to piss off everybody last week in a series of industrial-scale gaffes. First, in an interview with CNN, Carney called for a, quote, Zionist Palestinian state. This was apparently the perfect tone to piss off everybody, while being la-la land on a scale notorious moron Justin Trudeau could only dream of. But the real dumb was yet to come as Carney threw a hand grenade in trade negotiations with the U.S. by imposing a new Canadian tax targeting American tech companies that Trump had warned would be a red line, a, quote, attack on our country. The tax itself, called the Digital Services Tax, or DST, was passed under Trudeau and charges big tech companies 3% of their revenue in Canada, like sales tax. Now, Canada has almost no big tech companies aside from Pornhub, YouPorn, and Brazzers, home of BigWetButts.com. Yes, Canada is the Saudi Arabia of porn. That means roughly 90% of the revenue was going to come from American companies like Netflix, Amazon, Etsy, and, of course, Elon Musk X. Trump was asking Carney to delay the tax during trade negotiations, recognizing that it's one of Canada's bargaining chips. Instead, Carney threw it away, sacrificing $762 billion in U.S. trade, everything from Canada's massive car parts industry to its mining and forestry industries that altogether make up 1/5 of the entire Canadian economy, for a tax that was expected to raise less than $1 billion a year. Trump, as promised, immediately terminated all trade negotiations with Canada, meaning the 25 to 50% tariffs would stay. Secretary Dissent went on TV to announce his inclination to open a so-called Section 301 investigation against Canada for the tax. And suddenly, like a light flipped or a cheap suit folded, Carney caved and actually rescinded the DST altogether. Not delaying, but rescinding. In other words, not only did Carney throw away a bargaining chip he didn't have to, he did it in a way that guaranteed worldwide headlines, how he bended to Trump like a massage therapist with rent due. So as sex, in the 1950s, hot rodders played a game called Chicken, where you drive directly at each other and the first guy to swerve is the wimp. Mark Carney has staked his political reputation on fighting Trump. His bumper stickers are Canada's not for sale and elbows up, a hockey term meaning let's fight. Problem is, this is a game of chicken Canada cannot win. Exports to Canada make up 1.4% of American jobs, but they make up 1/5 of Canadian jobs. That's a 15-to-1 power imbalance. Or as Trump put it with characteristic subtlety, quote, we have all the cards, every single one. Now, given this, the smart move for Carney would be given to Trump on the little things, fentanyl on the border, 240% milk tariffs, discriminatory taxes, to protect the big things, the 4 million Canadian jobs that export to the U.S. Instead, Carney is a loose cannon painting a target on millions of Canadians. Now, Carney did what he had to this time in the most humiliating way he could find, but the jury's out if he has the maturity or the brains to do what actually benefits Canadians, as opposed to feel-good slogans, then caving when the other side's elbows go up. A word from our sponsor. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada. They're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's CoinKite.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. Elon Musk wants to start a third party to give some competition to our ruling Uniparty. Prediction market Kalshi is putting 41% odds it'll actually happen, so is it a good idea? Or is there a better way? A few days ago, Elon posted on X that if the, quote, insane big beautiful bill passes, quote, the America Party will be formed the next day to save Americans from Uniparty dead slavery. X-user Roman Helmet Guy replied the new party would get 20% of the vote, coming mostly from former Republicans, which would hand Dems a supermajority they would use to throw Elon in prison. To which Elon responded, laughing, quote, pretty much. Unfortunately, this is how third parties work in American history. I mean, minus the thrown in prison part, that is new. The last time a third-party candidate had a serious presidential run was 1992, when Ross Perot won 19% of the vote, which mostly came from George Bush. This was enough to flip 22 states to Bill Clinton, handing him the White House. Okay, so forget the president. What about a third party? Well, we've had hundreds of third-party tries in America. Indeed, the Libertarian Party trudges on after 50 years of failure. Of those hundreds, 7 have gotten more than 10% of the vote. And they did the same thing, drain votes from whichever party they're closest to, handing power to the guys their own voters hate the most. There's one single third-party success dating to 1800, but even that was not a real third party. The Democratic-Republicans split in half. So what has worked many times in American history is party takeovers, as in ideologues invade the party, channeling money, resources, and messaging to topple one ideology inside the party and replace it with something new. This worked in the 1820s, 1850s, 1890s, 1930s, 1960s. It worked in the 1990s when Democrats traded FDR's Working Man Coalition for Wall Street and Corporate Pride Month. It worked in the 2010s when the Tea Party took just 8 years to move the party from John McCain and Mitt Romney to, by 2016, a boss battle between the Tea Party Ted Cruz and the Tea Party Donald Trump. So the key is 3 important facts. First, parties are lightly defended on the inside. They have thick walls between the parties, but it's wide open on the inside. In particular, it's wide open for money. Second key fact, politicians don't actually believe in anything. Now, people say this in lament, but it also means they won't fight you. They will follow the money like dogs. Third, important key fact, every party is a permanent civil war between its voters and its special interests or donors, meaning that at any given moment, politicians are doing lots of things their own voters hate. This gives you the opening. There is always widespread discontent within the party. So what's next? Elon's right that our uniparty system is broken, but third parties are doomed, while takeovers have a fantastic track record. They take time, it's trench warfare primary by primary, but they do work. Right now, Republican voters are fired up, the kindling is there, but they also deeply trust Trump, meaning Elon would have a much easier time remaking the GOP with Trump's blessing. In short, the uniparty can and should be toppled, but American history says you do it on the inside. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersaintange.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.